All right, joining me on the show today is a good friend of the show, Chris Lee. You can check him out over at the Southeastern 14. They got a lot of great SEC content going on over there, and also Vandysports.com. He's publisher and podcast host over at both places. And then Chris, it's always good to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank God we've actually got real football to talk about. I mean, recycling the same talking points for 3 months is fun, but I kind of prefer this.
You know, because I'm not a big Major League Baseball guy. I do watch college basketball. I watch the NBA playoffs, but it's kind of like when we get during the summertime, it's like outside of when
Yeah.
media days hit, it's like, which I don't know, conference realignment has given us a lot to talk about if you just want to talk about stuff on the national scale, which I know it hasn't affected the SEC, but you know, it's in the conversation, especially after what Greg Sankey had to say on Feinbaum a few weeks ago.
Yeah, fortunately, I'm a baseball fan. If you're watching the video version, you can see my allegiance. So it's been a fun summer. I think that's probably an allegiance shared by a lot of people in your neck of the woods. But yeah, I mean, it's the conference realignment thing. It's and that and the portal. It's kind of made this like NFL, and that it's almost a 12-month news cycle. I'm probably not almost anymore. It kind of is.
Yeah, because I'm an NFL fan, so I said, okay, the college stuff is slowed down. I can sneak in some NFL conversation on my shows or on my YouTube channel. But you're right, it's like okay, and it's like at least with the NFL, we know when free agency starts. With college, it's we get two things of it, and then you got recruiting, the regular recruiting, and then spring ball. It's just I would like the college football to somehow one day in college athletics kind of figure out a schedule, a calendar, you know, because the NFL does have it down to a science, and the NBA does a good job with their free agency during the summer as well. We know when those are happening. College is like you wake up one morning, Chris, okay, such and such has entered the transfer portal. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really realignment right now is the one that's got everybody hitting refresh every day just because you just never know what's coming next.
Yeah, before we got on, I had got a notification on my phone from Bleacher Report saying it looks like the ACC is getting closer to expanding with the California schools. So I guess just call yourselves the Coastal Conference, not the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Right, right. Yeah, I think when you've got members on two oceans, then maybe you should consider a name change. But when have we done that?
Yeah, and it's really interesting going into this year because it really feels like, a lot of people have said it. This is kind of like college football, college athletics as we know it. This is kind of the last year. I mean, we go into the 12-team playoff next year. And then, look, it is what it is. This is the end of the Pac-12 as we know it for sure, maybe as a conference overall. And then, we're going to have the four big conferences now, and who knows what else, as we mentioned here, is going to change. So this is kind of like, it's like an enjoy this year. I'm not saying all these things are bad either. I'm not criticizing, but it's just going to be different after this year.
Yeah, and I think next year is going to be a lot of fun with the playoff. I think just what I've never liked about college football is if you have a couple of off weeks and you're really good and you're peaking down the stretch, your season. I'm not going to say it's meaningless, but it's more meaningless. Like a bowl used to mean something, right, Phillip? And now you've got opt-outs and all these things, and you see these games where you see shells of teams play in bowl games where they don't mean anything, and you probably got too many of them to begin with. But now, a bad weekend doesn't knock you out of things, all those things. I just think that the 12-team playoff next year, maybe we get the same winner anyway, but to me, that's not all the point. It's giving those other guys something to play for too. Yeah, maybe Ole Miss sneaks in the playoff is a 12, and they're not going to win the whole thing. But just having those storylines, having extra games to watch that are competitive, to me, that's going to be a lot of the fun of it, and I look forward to that.
I mean, we have other sports on the professional side. Yeah, we kind of probably have an idea who are going to be the 2 or 3 teams that probably will win the championship. But still, it's fun, that journey. You go through the NFL playoffs, a lot of years you may think, okay, these are probably 3 or 4 teams that probably going to get to the Super Bowl. And then again, you never know. What if you get hot at the end of the year? What if, say, maybe early in the year, your quarterback goes down with an injury, he comes back later in the year, you get hot at the end, you win your conference championship, you may have 3 losses, but then you could run through something like that. So that's also going to be one, because we see teams that do this. They get hot at the end of the year, they figure some stuff out. And then we always talk about these teams that make these bowl games, like the bigger bowl games, like, oh man, if they were in a playoff, that'd be a team I would want to play. So that I think that adds an element that's going to be exciting too.
Well, I mean, we say we know the teams, and that's been the narrative for a few years now. But you look at what the portal is doing with things in NIL, and how much more spread out the landscape of competitive teams is getting pretty quickly. I mean, just look in the SEC, right? There's three teams that prominently get mentioned to win the title: Alabama, LSU, Georgia. But I mean, if Tennessee snuck in there and won the whole thing, would you be completely shocked? No. If A&M did it, would you be completely shocked? No. That's five teams right there that got a chance, maybe. I look at the league this year. I think that 1 to 14, it's very competitive. I think after those 4 or 5 teams at the top, I have a hard time separating the teams next. I can give you tiers, but I can't tell you with confidence that Ole Miss is better than Arkansas, or that Mississippi State is better than Auburn, or vice versa, or even that Florida is better than Vanderbilt or whatever. I think that the fact that it is more muddled, again, I don't like the way we arrived here in a lot of ways, but the fun part of it is I think it's made it more competitive and it's given more parity, and right when the playoffs coming in. And I think that combination of everything could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, Jimbo Fisher gets out of the way of Bob Petrino. Who knows what A&M could do this coming year?
That's an assumption and may not be one I should make, but right.
It's bad when people say, yeah, they could win in spite of their head coach as long as he stays out of the way. That's not good. That is not a good thing to have on your program, but it looks like that could be the case at A&M.
Well, you know, what's funny is I had some A&M fans get mad at some stuff we said on our show last week. And somebody started with do you guys do your homework? And I'm like, no, it's the homework that's the problem. I was in the room at media days when Jimbo Fisher gave the wonky answer to who's running your offense. I'm like, nobody held a gun to his head and made him say that. All you say is Jimbo Fisher's our coordinator. Freudian slip there, right? Bobby Petrino is our offensive coordinator. He's running our offense. That way it's not a story. It's what everybody wants you to say. Why he couldn't just leave it at that and move on. And I'm thinking, don't get mad at me. Get mad at your head coach for creating a storyline where a 5-year-old could have figured out not to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We could do a whole conversation. And actually, this first 7 minutes, this was absolutely not planned where we was going to go with this. But you know, that's how it is. That's the good thing about it. Let's talk. You mentioned Vanderbilt a few minutes ago, and Vanderbilt opened up week 0. Of course, a little bit later than what was originally planned. 6:30 kickoff. It was a little after 8. Vanderbilt wins 35-28. Different game than what it was last year. Same outcome. Vanderbilt beating Hawaii. What was your takeaway from it? Because if after last year, 5-7, Clark Lee, feel like Vanderbilt's going in a right direction. I think a lot of people are optimistic about AJ Swann, quarterback. He played well last year. I think going into this year, what was your big takeaway from Vanderbilt's win on Saturday night?
Well, it was funny. I was in the press box and I was talking to somebody who's pretty well connected to the team, and it just had the feel when you went to the press conference that they'd lost that game. They were up 21 in the fourth quarter, ended up winning it 35-28, but it felt like a loss. And I think that says something about standards there, which Vanderbilt normally doesn't have much in the way of standards, but I think there's expectations there. I think they all knew they didn't hit the mark. I would give that performance a D. Now, look, Hawaii is a better team. That air raid they've got, I think, Vanderbilt's going to have trouble covering, but they had some legit guys out there. And there were times that the coverage was there, and there was a window about that big, and he put a 40-yard throw right there. So there's that. But I think the things with Vanderbilt, you wanted to see them mount a rushing attack. They didn't really do that for any length of time. They couldn't run the ball out into the game. That's why Hawaii stayed in it. Vanderbilt just tried to run the ball and run clock. They couldn't get yards, which is kind of a problem when you're playing a Mountain West team that was lower half of the league a year ago. Mm-hmm. And then I think on the other side, we wondered, could they corner or could they cover, particularly from the corner spots? They didn't. So the things that you were worried about going into the game certainly popped up in week 1. Now, look, most coaches will tell you teams improve the most from week 1 to week 2. I don't think we're going to know that with Vanderbilt because Alabama A&M is next week. That's a game they should win pretty handily. Wake Forest, week 3 in Winston-Salem, which, by the way, is a 10 a.m. kickoff central. That'll be interesting. I think that's when we'll know more with Vandy. But It wasn't the showing you wanted to see from them, but they won the game, and this is a game that if they'd won that a year ago or 2 years ago, they'd have been celebrating like they won the Super Bowl. So I just think the way it went down told you a lot about shifting of expectations there.
I saw that the Wake Forest kickoff time. What reason are they kicking off at 10 a.m.?
ACC network.
I
think that's all there is to it.
I guess they wanted to go to work early. I don't know. Just 10 a.m. would be fun.
Well, I mean, it is 11 Eastern, so in their time zone, it's not,
that's true.
It's not egregious. It's just for those of us in Central, it's not as much fun.
Central time zone is where I live at, Chris. So I need to accommodate to that. But anyways, week one, and we talked about this off air. This, we always get excited week one, but this is not, most attractive weekend of games, especially with the SEC. We were talking off air too. Like this would be Florida and Utah would be better suited on Saturday just because you would have better matchups. But of the week one matchups, which one are you most intrigued by?
Well, the easy answer is LSU Florida State, and I am for all the reasons everybody knows. That's a game of national significance, probably college football playoff implications with that one. Two very evenly matched teams. I think, though, the two games I'm really most interested in watching, probably North Carolina, South Carolina, because there's a lot of different ways you can look at South Carolina. And boy, that fan base will let you know if you don't look at it the way they want you to. But I mean, it's the what is Spencer Rattler question. It is, they lose two NFL defensive backs. Do they stop Drake May? Can they run the ball? Will it matter? Do they keep beating people on special teams? Can they reduce their turnovers? And I think the big thing is Shane Beamer's teams have been very different teams depending on where the calendar is. Really, they've not been very impressive until November the last 2 years. And look, he worked a miracle getting into a bowl game that first year. So 7-6 wasn't a great record. That wasn't a good team. That wasn't on Shane Beamer. He overachieved with that team. Last year, though, I saw them in person a week or two before that Tennessee game. They just weren't very good. And I mean, if you'd said they're going to beat Clemson in Tennessee, I'd have said, hey, sign me up to get on the other side of that bet. So the question really to me is Carolina what Carolina was, South Carolina, at the end of last year, or is it more the same where this team gels later in the season? And again, I don't want to be finding out facing Drake May week one. So that game to me is fascinating. And I think the other one is I think the injuries have kind of brought this Florida-Utah game back into interesting territory. I know Florida won that game a year ago, but that was with Anthony Richardson as quarterback. So the step to Graham Mertz, I'm going to presume, is a step down, even if reports were pretty positive on him out of camp. I just don't think Florida's got the talent that Florida's had year past. I don't look at that roster. It doesn't strike me the same way. But Utah's pretty banged up. I mean, if Cam Rising plays, I'd be a little surprised. But he might. They listed him first on the depth chart. I think that you've seen the line kind of go all over the place on that one. I think it was 8.5 to start things a month or two ago, which I thought was too lenient in Florida's direction. It dropped to 5, and I think it's headed back up to where it started because of Rising being listed first on the depth chart. But I'm not really buying it. We'll see what they do. That game to me, especially with Utah being banged up, whether Florida can make it interesting or not, to me is a big storyline because I really want to see is Florida what I think it is, which isn't very good, or is Florida what a lot of fans think it is, which is the team that had more talent than people thought. And year two under Billy Napier with familiarity gets a lot better. I really want to see that one and maybe get some hints there.
Yeah, the quarterback's interesting there because I agree with you, Cam Rising. And if he plays, I just wonder how limited he's going to be because he's you don't think of him as a great runner, but he has running ability. So if the ACL is still not fully, if he's not fully 100%, you got to say that's going to be gone. And look, I have said this plenty of times. Whenever Florida comes up, I am not big on Graham Mertz because every time I would flip over to a Wisconsin game, Chris, and it was a close game going to the fourth quarter, he would have a meltdown.
Yeah.
We thought the interceptions would come up, and he's talented. He has the ability to be a really good quarterback, and he has shown that at Wisconsin. So I do kind of worry about all that on that front with him.
Yeah, he was what a high 4 or 5-star recruit coming out of college. He's played a long time. Maybe sometimes just that fourth, fifth year it starts to click. You see that with guys. You saw it with Hendon Hooker at Tennessee. Just to throw one out there off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean he's had a fairly pedestrian career, and to me that doesn't strike me as an upgrade from Anthony Richardson, but we'll see.
You mentioned South Carolina, North Carolina, and you talk about Spencer Rattler, and I'm with you. I want to see which Spencer Rattler we're going to get. Is it going to be what we saw for 7 games last year, or the last couple games of the season last season? Because the thing with North Carolina, which Gene Chisholm's got to get some stuff figured out. They were not good defensively last year. A lot of teams put up a lot of points on them, but if Spencer Rattler comes in that game, turns the ball over, Drake May's not really. He didn't show it last year as a quarterback that's going to turn the ball over, make a whole lot of mistakes. He's pretty careful with the football. He doesn't, turn the ball over. I feel like if Spencer Rattler plays his capabilities, we could get a shootout on that one.
Yeah, I think we could too, and I think we will. I'm not sure that I trust either side to stop the other one. South Carolina fans are very quick to point out that a lot of Spencer Rattler's stat line, which was all over the place, that they simplified the offense the last couple of games, and they were different. Of course, they beat Tennessee, they beat Clemson, and they gave Notre Dame all Notre Dame wanted in a bowl game before losing. But that's not a big sample size either. That's 3 games. And, oh, by the way, they changed offensive coordinators to Dowell Loggins, who was as a Titans fan. I don't think people were just, shedding a lot of tears when he left town as the offensive coordinator. That wasn't the most exciting hire. Maybe they make it work. I'm not saying South Carolina can't win the game. I picked North Carolina. I think it's going to be close. I think it's a toss-up. But I don't know. I have a lot of questions because there's a lot of mixed signals with that team.
You mentioned LSU, Florida State, and that's what I'm looking forward to most, Sunday night. I mean, that should be good. And it's just different feel than last year. Last year was Brian Kelly's first game, rebuilding LSU after 2 bad years under Coach O. Florida State, Mike Norvell was on the hot seat going into last year, 2 back-to-back losing seasons there. And now we turn around this year. Chris, this is 2 teams that have aspirations for a national championship. Because you're not just to make the playoff, but to win the national title. And I look at this game, LSU, I like quarterback Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, those guys. You know what we got at Harold Perkins, and then the other side, Florida State with Jordan Travis, all them. What's going to be the keys for that game for you watching it?
Man, this one is interesting because both fan bases are convinced they're going to win it, and they can tell you why, and I can tell you the reasons why. And look, Florida State, you look at that returning roster, their offensive line has started 200-something games, I think. Now, not all those are at Florida State. There's a couple of transfers. Jordan Travis has played forever. You start going down their tackle sheets, their rushing sheet, and like they bring just about everybody back. And in this day and age of college football, you don't see that much. And so I think on one hand, like that right there is the profile of the team that you bet on. On the other hand, LSU, and when we did our preview videos, which we do for every game involving FBS teams in the SEC, that's one of those I really, honest to God, I did not know who I was going to pick walking in. And then when it was time for me to make my pick, there's that nagging voice in the back of my head that said, I just don't pick against LSU in this spot. And I think part of that, Phillip, I think back to a year ago. LSU was picked, 5th in the West, I think, by most people. I believe when he took that job, they had, 39 scholarship players there? That ain't anything close to a full roster. Nobody had LSU being competitive and winning the West on that bingo card. Now, look, you look down that roster this year, and it's pretty talented. I know they don't have Mason Smith, but they got Harold Perkins. I guess your questions are at cornerback, and that's probably the biggest thing I'm going to be watching is how ready are those 2 guys, because they got a couple of new starters there. I think both are transfers. But, yeah, this is one that I think the thing that resonates with me is how quickly Brian Kelly fixed this a year ago in a spot that screamed they had no business being that competitive. That's why I'm going LSU. Will the Mason Smith injury change it? Maybe. But I just can't ride against them based on what I saw from them last year and how quickly he put it together.
And talking about LSU, and we can't have a podcast talking about the SEC without mentioning the Alabama Crimson Tide. LSU and Alabama. That there's people, and I'm on the LSU side of things. I'll just let everybody know I think LSU is going to win the West this year. That's my pick going into the season. Yes, I'm right for Auburn. Y'all can send y'all's tweets at P Jordan SEC. Alabama fans, where are you on that? Alabama or LSU in the West?
I'm planting one foot firmly on both sides by what I've done. Full confession, we did a playoff pick show that I kind of forgot we were going to do, and so I went into it screaming a little bit, and I picked Alabama to win, to get in the playoff along with Georgia. I did not have LSU there, even though I picked LSU to win the West, which that's maybe it's hedging bets, but part of me thinks that what's going to happen is LSU wins the West. Alabama benefits by not playing Georgia and taking a loss, potentially a title game, and slipping in the back door to the playoff. But I think what that shows you is how competitive they are. And I think what it was, honestly, Phillip, it was kind of the same thing that when push came to shove, I'm like, am I really going to bet against Nick Saban making the playoffs 2 years in a row? The quarterback thing is, I think, what is causing us all to have trouble. And we're sitting here doing this on a Monday morning, Monday afternoon of game week, and we still don't know, unless something's broken in the last couple hours, who the starter is. And there's 4 names mentioned. Now, I don't think it's a 4-guy battle, but you get the point.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of the same thing that I did with that FSU pick with LSU. It's like there's a little bit of nagging thing that says don't pick against Nick Saban. I've got the doubts like everybody else. But the big thing to me is I just think it's going to be a fun year because we're having this conversation. We're not just assuming Alabama's this juggernaut that's going to wipe the floor with everybody like it did in the past. And again, that's another reason I've got this, is what I think is going to be a fun year. Just the unknowns and the arguments of this guy or that guy, and I can give you reasons for both.
Last question. I told you 20. I kept you a few minutes over that. The Georgia Bulldogs. Just the assumption they're going to win the SEC, definitely win the East. Do you see any potential hiccups for them this year?
Well, yeah, Knoxville. How did that go for Alabama a year ago? And I think when everybody assumes something, I start to just kind of automatically question. And so I kind of did that. It's like, well, we're just all giving Georgia the East and the SEC and looking at the schedule saying they're going to run the table and go unbeaten. Well, that's the Knoxville trip is one thing that I would say, hey, maybe not so fast. The other one is just that assumption. And they got a new quarterback, and Carson Beck may be all SEC, but he might not. We haven't seen him play. We don't know. But here's the problem, Phillip. When you start to try to poke holes in Georgia beyond that, offensive line's tremendous. They've got a stable of capable running backs. That receiving room, my goodness, they pulled the best receiver from Mississippi State and Missouri. That's in addition to Ladd McConkey, Rosamie Jackson. I mean, all those guys they've got. Oh, and there's that Brock Bowers guy too, right? I mean,
he's decent. He's decent, Chris.
Yeah, he can play a little bit. And you look at the defense, and you know, just part of me rolls my eyes at this best defense ever thing. I just think that defense 2 years ago is going to be kind of hard to top. But we said that a year ago. They put umpteen guys in the NFL, and can they do it again? Well, they did it again. And you look at their tackle sheet every year, and it seems like they play 59 guys on defense. You know, I remember we talked about Jordan Davis a couple years ago. Everybody was giving Jordan Davis, you know, saying he should be in the Heisman. I'm like, wait a minute, this guy plays 35% of snaps. You know, and that's because they've got other guys, which is the point I'm making. That defense has been so deep with so many good guys for so many years. I think once you start trying to poke holes in them, it really comes down to what if Carson Beck is not what they think he is? but because other than that, it's a little bit hard to find fault with the roster.
Yeah, it is. I mean, just he looked good in spring, but hey, once you get actually in these real games, live games, in meaningful snaps, I mean, we know we played, but it was when the game was over at
Yeah.
Georgia. So we'll see. We'll see. It's gonna be fun. It all gets started this Saturday with Week 1 of college football. And Chris, it's been great having you on, talking all things SEC football, college football, and a national scope too as well. If the listeners and the viewers want to catch you, where can they find you? Where can they check out vandysports.com and the Southeastern 14?
Yeah, I've run Vanderbilt's rival site, vandysports.com, for over 20 years now. We've got a podcast. You can find that at most places. You can find it on YouTube. For the SEC, I also run a YouTube channel, Southeastern 14, which is just exploded in growth lately. And what we do there, I always say, if you're looking to know more about your favorite team, Alabama, Auburn, whoever, you go find your local beat writers because they're going to know more than I know. But if you're looking for a really good 30,000-foot view at all 14 teams, we work really hard on that. We bring on good guests. We really try to stay on top of it and give you a one-stop landing spot for SEC football. Oh, by the way, we cover basketball and baseball year-round too, so good reason for you to tune in just other than football. But go to YouTube, search Southeastern 14. You'll find us there, and I think you'll like what we do. We just started a daily show that is 11 to noon Central. That's been a lot of fun. I've had Gavin Schoenwald on. He was playing tight end at Vanderbilt this time a year ago. He's kind of a co-host for now as he tries to navigate his way in the NFL and those kind of things. But, yeah, we've had some fun with that. I think your audience would appreciate that as well.
Yes, everybody go check out the Southeastern 14. And once again, Chris, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to doing this again sometime down the road.
Hey, enjoyed it, Phillip. Thank you for having me.